Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and today we're talking about Lex Luthor, OMAC, various DC heroes, and just all sorts of stuff. But before we get into that, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but also we love to hear from you guys. We've got an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, all that said, let's dive in. The prologue to today's story is a brief recap of previous relevant stories. Recently, we ran a Superman adventure in which the supervillain known as Metallo was defeated. And when the Metropolis Police Department showed up, they told Superman that they did not have the financial ability to contain supervillains anymore. So Metallo was taken to LexCorp, where, of course, Lex Luthor would reverse engineer anything that he could and add it to his arsenal. Same with all the other villains that LexCorp had in their possession. Superman hated this, but the cops told him that due to budget cuts, they just had to fire half of the police force. This was something that we mentioned a few weeks back, and I feel like it's something that would be really easy to overlook. But this was actually just the newest in a long string of very similar events. Over the years in our role playing game, my philosophy has always been that this is a superhero role playing game, and therefore, superheroes need to be the priority. So if the cops have the ability to handle the Joker all on their own, they wouldn't need Batman. If the NYPD could deal with the Green Goblin, then our friendly neighborhood Spider Man would be out of a job. So, as a consequence of that philosophy, we've told decades worth of stories that paint Earth K's authority figures as unable to get the job done at best, and honestly, collapse of civilization at worst. And there is a lot that I could say about that, but as we got more and more into cyberpunk, LexCorp gained more and more access to things, including a US government experiment, which was called the OMAC project. And by the way, in this particular instance, OMAC, OMAC, stood for Omni-Mind and Community. And simply put, the powers that be put nanites into citizens without their consent. And this allowed them to weaponize ordinary people. The nanites could then coat the person in a blue shell-like surface, as depicted in the channel art this week. And each OMAC has super agility, super strength, flight, endurance, etc. And in addition to all of that, if they had a hero or villain on file and that character had some sort of a weakness listed, then the OMACs had a little bit of Omni-Power that they could use. So if they're fighting a Kryptonian, they could sub their Omni-Power for an energy blast that uses something like the energy from Kryptonite or red sun radiation, that sort of thing. And of course, if someone like Lobo decides to cut an OMAC in half, the horrific truth of the matter is that inside each one is a person who did not sign up for this, right? Making an OMAC extremely hard to handle. And now Lex Luthor knows how to make them. And with all the recent talk about the once and future king, Lex, who does not like that, right? Because He's looking out for number one. If anyone's going to rule, it's going to be him, right? So he unleashes his own army of OMACs to go after the heroes. And he's trying to make it look like they still work for the government. And inside of each OMAC is a military veteran. As Earth K's governments were slowly in free fall, for years, one of the first budget cutbacks that we showed was to the VA. So all the hospitals that are supposed to help our veterans were instead turning them away. LexCorp then jumped at that opportunity, claiming to help them. But in reality, any injections that they gave these guys were really just OMAC nanites. So while a veteran might feel better initially, it was really the OMAC project in their bloodstream getting them back into fighting shape again. So Lex Luthor activates his own version of the Brother Eye satellite and is able to override the thoughts and wishes of each of those soldiers. The nanites activate and form blue shells over each one. And then on the shoulders, Lex places military logos to keep people from suspecting that these guys were actually created at LexCorp. Lex also sends drone cameras to record what happens next, so that when a hero cuts one with a sword, Lex wants to be able to put that on the Jumbotron for all to see, and broadcast it to, TVs and cell phones and whatever he can, right? He also wants to put the name of that veteran on the screen, along with any family members they may have. So you get the idea, right? This is all rigged, right? So right off the bat in this adventure, the heroes have things stacked against them. And that brings us to the main plot of this particular game session, when the OMACs show up and confront Arthur Pendragon. We were confused on what language the OMACs would use, by the way, if they would say that Arthur was guilty of insurrection or sedition or treason or terror or whatever, but you get the gist, right? They basically say that Arthur is trying to take over, right? And they claim that the United States government does not intend to allow him to just do it. And the player characters at this point believe that OMAC really does represent the government and that they're the real deal, right? So Arthur is the one who asks, how do the OMACs still exist? He says that he thought the Shaper of Worlds deleted all of the government's property, and that would include any OMAC nanites left over from the original OMAC project. It would take out the Brother Eye satellite, the original one, so he's questioning this. And Lex Luthor, by the way, is back at LexCorp Tower. He's got a team of guys, so he shouts a number, just like we saw in the recent James Gunn movie. And then one of his employees pushes a button, and then one of the OMACs uses the Omni-Arm power to turn his right hand into a bladed weapon, which he uses to take a swing at Arthur with, right? So we rolled the dice. We used GURPS rules for this particular adventure, and Arthur makes a successful parry check. So that blue blade is stopped by Excalibur. And the drone cameras catch this and zoom in. People all over the world are seeing this on various devices, various screens. And Arthur says he is not convinced that these guys came from the government. So he asks to see identification. The OMACs say that given the recent crisis, martial law has been declared and is still in effect. Then they attack again. And this time, Superman and Batman run interference. And as a brief aside, in an old comic book called World's Finest, Volume 1, issue number 162, we saw Batman and Superman used time travel to go back to Camelot, where they helped King Arthur and his men defend Camelot against alien invaders. And by the end of that issue, Superman and Batman were both knighted, and they became members of the original Round Table. So, getting back to this specific game session, when they jump in and defend Arthur, that's the context, right? Because we're saying that that comic book, that it happened on Earth K exactly like that, right? So we're saying that's continuity. But so they jump in and they protect Arthur. And then Wonder Woman is also here. And we have spent a ton of time on this channel talking about the relationship between her and King Arthur. So she defends him too. Aquaman is also a king. So he is in the favor of kingdoms and stuff like that. You know, it seems totally reasonable to him. So he's also on board, right? Barry Allen is a man of the people. And as he's been running around, literally, you know, he's been feeding the masses and stuff like that. We had a Flash adventure recently where we were talking about what the Flash family was up to, right? They're able to talk to people. And like we said, this was this grassroots situation, right? Where Arthur himself is not like, yeah, I'm taking over. That's not what's been happening. People are saying, you know what? We're tired of all these systems collapsing. What if Arthur tried it his way? You know, if he's the once and future king, when is it? You know, like, do it already. Let's have that, you know. And by the way, it's the same with the Martian Manhunter who can read minds, right? He knows what everybody's thinking. He doesn't think there's anything bad going on here. And then Hal Jordan is the last of the big seven, right? The original members of the Justice League. And the guy who was playing Hal Jordan, his take on him was that he was a hot shot test pilot, kind of like Maverick from Top Gun, who was not a huge fan of orders and bureaucracy and stuff like that. And he became a Green Lantern, but then he was butting heads with the Guardians on Oa. And if you go back and read all the stuff that led up to the Parallax story, Hal had a lot of reasons to not love authority figures, basically, right? So he's not, you know, just because he used to be in the military and be a pilot, you know, in the Korean War and stuff like that, that doesn't mean he loved, you know, all of this stuff that had been going on in the game world, politics wise, right? So he's also, and he's been to other planets. He's had a million experiences with a million different planets, many of whom have something close to a king, right? Whether it's Starfire's race or Maxima's race or whoever. I mean, if you look at DC Comics, there's actually far more kingdoms than there are like democracies. So we aired on the side that Hal would just be kind of unfazeable and just be like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. As long as people are being treated well, you know, that's all that matters. And there are other members of JLU here as well, like Apollo from The Authority, Green Arrow, right? AKA Oliver Queen. We've got another Green Lantern who is Guy Gardner. We've got King Shark, Peacemaker, Negative Flash, aka Mina. I don't know how to say her last name. It's pronounced Dhawan. I would assume that's like Dawan. I apologize. If someone knows, tell me how to pronounce that. I've only seen it written down. I've never heard anybody say it out loud. And this is the first adventure she's ever been in, by the way. We've never had her in a game before. And then last but not least was Manchester Black. He was also here. Oh, I left one out. I left out a huge one, which is Patriot, aka Steve Trevor. And we're going to be talking about him in the next video. If you want more information about that, go to Google and just type Steve Trevor Patriot. And there was an old Wonder Woman story where he got the powers of Wonder Woman, and he wore a red, white, and blue costume and was fighting crime and stuff like that. So we're gonna be talking more about him in upcoming adventures. But at any rate, so we've got this classic OMAC versus heroes situation now, right? And Lex Luthor keeps hoping that one of the heroes is going to hurt one of the hostages locked inside of an OMAC shell. But the heroes had to fight OMACs in the past, so they know what's what, right? And then they're like my wife, who played Wonder Woman, she remembered the OMAC situation and commented on how tragic it was. And she was telling everybody at the game table, hey, here's what's going on. So instead of them just cleaving a guy in half or whatever, they rip the shells off, right? The lanterns substitute their Omni-Power for teleportation with the limitation that it only works on organic matter. And so that way they were able to teleport the hostage out of the shell, leaving that sort of nano husk behind, right? Separating them totally, things like that. So the heroes save the day, right? Which brings us to the epilogue. I was honestly figuring someone, um, like the player who was playing King Shark was going to take a bite out of an OMAC or critically injure the people inside in some other way, right? So that Lex Luthor could then spin this the way he had hoped to. But to my surprise, everyone got through this unscathed. I was very impressed, honestly. So Lex Luthor resorts to Plan B, which we also ripped off from the recent James Gunn movie. So Lex appears on screens everywhere, telling everybody that Arthur is actually an alien invader with a harem who's here to conquer the earth and dominate the human genome with his own alien DNA. And Guy Gardner buys it. He's like, what? And so he goes to attack Arthur. So Hal Jordan gets in the middle of it, right? And Hal fights Guy. So we get Lantern versus Lantern there, right? And then King Shark goes after Arthur, because he's kind of just mindless and has a very simplistic understanding of who's good and who's bad. And so if the TV says Arthur's bad, King Shark's gonna try to take a bite out of him. So Aquaman steps in and we get King Shark versus Aquaman, right? Batman fights Peacemaker, which I thought was interesting, partially because of the Peacemaker TV show where he goes on a big rant about how much he hates Batman. But Batman hates guns, right? And that's Peacemaker's whole deal. Flash fights that negative Flash that we were talking about. Martian Manhunter has a psychic duel with Manchester Black. Superman fights Apollo, right? And Wonder Woman fights Patriot, aka Steve Trevor, which was my favorite of all of it, And again, this incarnation of Steve Trevor has the powers that Wonder Woman has, so they're a completely even match. And obviously they have history together, so that was huge. And there is so much going on with that situation that I think it deserves its own video. So I'm going to pause things here where we have a thing that's sort of similar to Marvel's Civil War, but with DC heroes who are now split over whether they support or oppose the premise of the once and future king. So we're going to talk about that more in the next video. As for this one, we really enjoyed playing this one. As always, we hope that you liked hearing about it. If you did, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. And from all of us here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth. We hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.